Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Chandra from Avian WE, who will set the context for this entire conversation. Why Pulse Talk, why we started with the idea of Pulse Talk, and why this particular episode at this point. Over to you, Chandra.
Thank you, Parul. Good evening, everyone. I extend a very warm welcome to people from who are there in the audience who have joined us today. And of course, to all the panelists today who have come together and taken off time for this very important discussion around digital health in India. While the pandemic came with its numerous challenges, there have also been some very fast emerging developments that have transformed, healthcare space totally. This became a perfect time for India, for instance, to leverage its digital caliber. And there is rapid pace of digital transformation and permeation in almost every business operation today, as many of you will agree, whether it's pharma, whether it's hospital providers, whether it's diagnostics, or whether it's medical technology companies, almost everybody has been impacted and very positively with this change. We saw during the last year and also this year as well, many technological innovations which allowed providers and patients to be better connected. With pressure on the tertiary system of healthcare, we could see digital mediums providing that much needed connect. Patients could be monitored through remote care, through various mediums that could help doctors monitor them, help provide care for both COVID and non-COVID critical patients as well. And, in addition, apart from treatment, it was not just about doctors and patients, whether we see, whether it was testing, whether it was diagnosis, whether it was, communications, or whether it was medication and vaccinations also. Almost we saw digital means coming into collection of samples, analysis, diagnosis, and of course, registration of the public. We saw portals being used by the government of India as well. So a lot of economic value has been created during this time from digital innovation models and data-driven technologies. And today, we are here to discuss what is this massive behavior change? How can we leverage this further? People are much more aware now that they want to be healthy. They need to go for health checkups. Vaccinations, for instance, has a positive response from so many of us. We are ready to take it if it will keep us disease-free and infection-free. So what is it that, we can leverage today, and, what can we learn from what has happened in the last 22 months? How can we take it further? Each company has, within the healthcare ecosystem, has the reach and convening power today to do something to harness their expertise. So today, I think we are here to understand how different organizations are also using varied communication approaches, apart from the way they have, dealt with their consumers and target audiences, how we can use this as communication professionals this time to leverage digital health to, really overcome that barrier in access and build equity for all. So over to you, Parul. I think I've set the context, and we would now like to hear from the panelists.
Yes, thank you so much, Chandra, for that very comprehensive laying out of the issues that we'll be discussing. I'd like to introduce the panel before we actually start the discussion. We have with us today Masooma Pathre, who is the Director of Communications for Emerging Markets. That's India, IndoChina, Frontier Markets, and Thailand for Medtronic, huge devices firm. Also does a lot of work in stroke awareness. Welcome, Masooma.
Thank you very much for that introduction, for that kind introduction. Hi.
Welcome, Masooma. Next up, we have with us Dr. Usha Iyer, who is Director External Communications with Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. Of course, I don't think I need to introduce Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. Welcome, Usha.
Thank you, Parul. Thank you so much. And thank you, Chandra, for laying out the context so well. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, Usha.
Thank you.
We also have with us Shipra Singh. She's the head of communications for GE Healthcare South Asia. Has recently taken over this role in the company in the middle of a lot of change. I think, if I'm not wrong, it was just recently spun out into a different entity altogether. Shipra's joined in the middle of all that. Welcome, Shipra.
Thank you, Parul. Thank you, Chandra. Very delighted to be here. And you rightly said, Parul, there's never peace for a communications person. But I guess that's something that also gives us the adrenaline rush. So I'm looking forward to this discussion and looking forward overall.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Shipra. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I also like to introduce Karishma Saran, who very kindly joined us at very short notice, and we really wanted that point of view. So she was kind enough to join us on this call today. She's Senior Manager at Advocacy and Communications with Find. Find offers low-cost diagnostic solution and tools for poverty-related diseases like tuberculosis, for example. It's a very well-known non-profit global group based in Geneva. Welcome, Karishma.
Thank you so much, Parul. And we also happen to have a huge presence in New Delhi. And Avian is one of our key partners. So it feels really good to be here. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you to have you here, Karishma. And last but definitely not the least, we have with us Catherine Devaney. She's Deputy MD and Head of Health UK with WE Communications. And with her, we're going to get that much needed UK point of view on how healthcare communication for digital progression is being is evolving, and what are the pros and cons on that. Welcome, Catherine.
Hi, very happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So here we go. So first up, my first question is for Masooma. Masooma, what do you flag off as the major digital healthcare trends for 2022? I know it's like asking you to lay out the entire vision and plan of this, but still, what do you think are the trends that would engage communicators?
So I think, before moving to what would engage communicators, let me, chalk out a little bit of what trends we are seeing in healthcare, particularly from med devices perspective. So, with the whole pandemic, we see that remote monitoring is actually a trend that got picked up and will continue to be there. I mean, we see that remote monitoring through wearable devices, through implants. I think that's a trend that is here to stay. And you will only see innovations getting added into that segment. The other thing is, I think AI and VR and data analytics is playing a very, very important role in this trend. Some time ago when we spoke, I did speak about, how AI is being used for stroke and, to actually reduce the whole door to needle time, by almost bringing it to 60 minutes. If you have an AI enabled center where a patient reaches, generally he would take, say, more than 4 hours to reach a center which is stroke ready. But if you have AI enabled centers which are like spoke and hub model, you can actually reduce the time there. So we see these are only increasing. Remote monitoring is here to stay, and AI and data analytics is only going to pick up. Now, what is that for communicators? I think one of the biggest tasks which is on us as medtech and as healthcare communicators is always awareness. It's always therapy awareness. It's always disease awareness, and that will continue. Whether we are talking about pre-pandemic or post-pandemic. What is changing right now is, what are the means that we are using to communicate? We see a lot of movement to digital communications that is happening. And the onus is lying on us to really make people aware of what are the trends and what are the available devices or therapies that they have that they can use for various diseases that are there. So I actually see that as communicators, we need to, keep on finding those new mediums to reach our consumers. And consumers are now getting loads of content. I think digital boom has always been there. And now post the pandemic, everything, your consumers are more doctor than actually a doctor. So, you tell them, I'm just giving you an example, caregivers Google much more than the patient themselves. So you tell a caregiver that, if a doctor suggests that your patient or your family member would need this implant, they have already done their study. So I think the need of the hour for us, medtech and, healthcare communicators, is to go all out and educate more on therapies and what are the right therapies and what is right for you. Obviously, the thing lies with the doctor and the patient to decide. But I see that trend will continue, and that onus lies on us.
Thank you so much. I just have two more additional questions before I go over to the entire panel. You mentioned, Masooma, that it's our job to really educate people. So given the stage of digital healthcare progression in India, how should communicators approach it, given the really wide variety of stakeholders, which can happen for the same disease or the same type of communication? So how do you differentiate between so many stakeholders? There's the urban-rural divide, there is the gender divide, there's the class divide. It's like mind-boggling, really.
It is, yeah. It is, and that's why you cannot have one kind of communication for everyone. It cannot work. You cannot say that, I have made this and this has to fit for everyone. Because as you rightly mentioned, see, the biggest issue with healthcare in India particularly is definitely awareness and the reach and accessibility. And, the requirement is that you need to tailor-make your communications according to your audiences. Now, it's also that we have to also understand that what works in urban may not work in rural also. And I think that's something that every organization realizes. Now, if you talk about, say, diabetes, type 1 diabetes, we are the diabetes capital of the world. And you see, we recently did this very simple campaign called the Blue Balloon campaign, where you keep on bouncing the blue balloon and do your daily work. Now, something like that I cannot do in rural. I can only do that in a digital world with the urban, audience. Now, in rural India, or where with type 1 diabetes, the patients cannot really afford those pumps and the monitors, you obviously have to work with various organizations at the grassroots level and provide these equipments or work with those those partners there. So I think as communicators, we definitely, our definition of target audience is very essential, and accordingly the communication changes. I mean, you have Usha here and Shipra here, they've been in this industry for a long time, and they would also agree with me that it is not one thing fitting all. Like, for example, if I talk about a pacemaker, I know that a pacemaker, a high-end pacemaker, which is Bluetooth enabled, is not something that I'm going to go and promote in the interiors of tier 4 or tier 5 cities. It's something that I would only talk about as a therapy only in the urban cities, right? So you have to really tweak according to the audience and the markets that you have.
Thank you, Masooma. One last question, and then I'll let you go to rest. And if you're around later, I'll come back. What is the Medtronic approach to the healthcare digitization trend which is happening? What does Medtronic, how does Medtronic view it as a company?
See, as I already told you, we knew that remote monitoring is something that we are promoting for a very long time. But we realized that when it came to really this pandemic time, it just picked up. It was like this, and we know that digitalization is changing the space altogether. So, like, I'll just give you an example. We have something called a spill cam. Pill cam is something which a patient is given, and the camera continuously takes the photograph. I'm just making it a little layman language of your stomach, and and the doctor then gets a live view of what is happening in the patient's intestine and the stomach. Now, this is something which basically is pure remote monitoring, and this, to pick up as a trend, we see it has only happened in 2021. 2020 and 2021. PillCam is existing for some time, but we see that now there is an acceptability which has come up, and people are kind of trying to ask, okay, what is this? Or we have something called as GI Genius, which we really did not launch in India, but then a product which actually can help you again do remote monitoring or AI for, say, colorectal cancer. Now, all this has changed because the whole gamut has changed, right? And that these would be acceptable in the markets now. So I think as a organization also, we have viewed that the whole landscape is changing, and accordingly the solutions have to change. And we see that the acceptability has also gone higher.
So Masooma has laid out the entire perspective for us. It almost sounds like out of something out of science fiction, cameras that you follow and a GI Genius, an Intel AI-enabled module. Over to you first, Usha, the same question that I really asked Masooma. What do you, from the point of view of Dr. Reddy's Laboratories, what do you think are the trends for digitization? How do you view that?
Okay. Thanks, Parul. And so much of what Masooma said is so relevant to all of us across the industry, whether we're coming at it from the technology, medtech point of view, or the pharmaceutical point of view, or the larger healthcare, hospitals and other service provider point of view. What I would I'll answer the question of exactly what the trend is in just a minute. And before that, I'd just like to say that digital healthcare, it can easily end up being just a buzzword, and it can also mean everything for everyone. From a pharmaceutical sector point of view, digital healthcare could be healthcare at fingertips. It could be bringing the entire outpatient circuit of doctors, consultations, diagnostics, results, your pharmacy deliveries, insurance even. And Chandra, when you were describing the changes that were happening, the insurance industry and enablement and fulfillment of patient requirements there is also something that has picked up so much speed. Digital therapeutics, apps, that let you sort of track your own healthcare journey and sort of, from that whole shift from illness to wellness that we keep hearing about. Then there is health tech, the wearables, the gadgets, and the kind of remote monitoring that Masooma was talking about. There's been so much movement on the part of various companies turning to chatbots and medical assistance through chatbots during the pandemic. There are disruptive business models that have picked up pace in the last few years in terms of e-commerce, and more players are getting into e-commerce. It's not restricted to just the pharmaceutical industry. There are so many others that you probably wouldn't have thought of have now entered the space. From just processes point of view, also for pharmaceutical players, you have different stakeholders as a pharmaceutical company. You have doctors, you have your field colleagues out in the field, you have partners, you have regulators who play a part. Your approach to each one of them has also changed during the pandemic. And some of the other things that Masooma mentioned, that embedding technology, automation in your R&D processes, AI and ML that she mentioned, embedding them in your manufacturing processes, in your supply chain processes. So everything that I've listed out is all relevant, and all of it can come under digital healthcare from a pharmaceutical industry perspective. So given all of this, I think that the one trend that I would root for is going to be a very unsexy, unglamorous answer, is just evolving a deeper understanding of all of this. From a company perspective, from a sector perspective, and from a communication perspective, I would say study the evolving landscape, develop deeper capabilities, develop a deeper understanding of how all of this gamut of things can help us work with and serve our stakeholders better, starting, of course, with patients. We keep saying as a sector, all of us keep saying that, we are here to meet unmet patient needs. And certainly there is a very big opportunity here. But making sense of all of this, the big untapped potential, the opportunity that is there. And all of this actually started from before the pandemic. It's not like the pandemic suddenly gave rise to this. It accelerated a lot of these processes. Now we're talking about it more and more. It's picked up significance. But I still think this is an evolving landscape. And so getting a deeper understanding, studying, developing deeper capabilities is going to be the one trend I'll vouch for. And of course, we will, I'm sure, at some point talk about the pros and cons also. But yeah, that's the one trend I would root for.
An unsexy but important point of view, study it well, map it well. That's the only way ahead. I'm going to come to Shipra and then Karishma and then Catherine with exactly the same question. What do you see trends coming from your specific lens?
Thanks, Parul. I think we have some very strong and pertinent inputs, from Masooma and Usha. I will top it up, from my observations from, the last few weeks of studying and being inside the organization. If I have to bucket the trends that we see in the medtech, equipment, diagnostics, and overall healthcare space, I can very clearly identify into three big categories. The first one would be, how are we looking at the concept of care itself? If I have to, look deeper into the concept of care, that really involves graduating from healthcare to healthy aging. And when I say healthcare to healthy aging, it really involves graduating and looking at the concepts from a predictive, preventive, personalized, and participatory lens. Right now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to solve for a problem as a more advanced and a more mature healthcare country. The next step really is to step back and solve for the step before and be ready before we are hit. The second principle in the concept of care would be the way we are looking at the access and delivery of care to our people, which really would be the fact that care needs to be designed around the people and not the place. Which we've kind of seen in the way the delivery of care has emerged during the times of COVID, technology empowering, remote monitoring, visits, virtual and teleconsultations, and all of that has already happened. That really points us to this one big trend, which is about the continuum of care and engagement models, which is beyond just virtual visits. And it is not just acceptable now, it is also desirable to a very large extent. So we have this patient care bit, which sits at the center of it. The second idea or the big trend here would be the resilience of the infrastructure. We know that India as a country, there is a huge imbalance in the urban and the rural infrastructure that we have. How do we bridge that? Is it really easy to bridge? What are the big recommendations and plays that need to come into action to be able to bridge that? I guess everybody on the panel would agree that the overall healthcare system in the country is very, very complex and very paradoxical, which also points us to the fact that no single entity can really solve for that problem. It has to be a platform play. It has to be the ecosystem coming together and coming up with a solution strategy with a very, very broad scope. So it is more of a corporate citizenship activity as opposed to a brand activity. I would like to just term it as the rise of the care ecosystem, which also points towards the brand, which is more the citizenship that I spoke about, and also towards the society, the way we are evolving as a society. There is an evolution of a care ecosystem. Now, the way we are looking at inclusion, there is also a concept of inclusion with respect to the patients. Earlier on, if you were to talk about cancer care, it was a tabooed subject. For some reason or the other, people were not really willing to broadcast the fact that I am a cancer patient, which means that the societal care aspect from a patient perspective was absolutely missing, but so essential. So that inclusivity and that ecosystem needs to come up from a brand perspective at a corporate level, building an ecosystem that builds that infrastructure, and also at a societal and a behavioral level. And finally, the big trend that I see and everybody here has been talking about is the technology bit, right? Everything technology. It involves artificial intelligence, robotics, big data, IoT. And the most important one that I'd like to talk about is precision health, which is very, very personalized in nature. And it actually is the one that is the biggest thing that's going to be defining the future of healthcare. In terms of the approaches of communications, now with all of this, the scope is massive. It is very, very intense. The scope is also very, very responsible. So the way we look at communications for healthcare is a little different than we should be looking at the communications for products or services, because it involves a lot of credibility and a lot of thinking in the way we approach it, particularly because you have to keep the patient and the care aspects at the core of every communication. And this is one of the things that I was discussing with my organization as well when I was beginning to get onboarded. That when you look at communications for healthcare, there is no share of voice game. The only game that's there is the share of mind game, because as communicators, we really need to believe and respect the philosophy of influencing perceptions, which means that you are in it for the long haul. We have to drive. We have to start asking the right questions, move away from the what are we going to do, to taking a step back and asking that why are we doing what we are doing, and why should we be going out and making that commitment or telling that story. If we answer the why, I think the credibility and responsibility follows. Getting deep into the benefit-centric aspect of everything that we do, and just remain very, very responsible. Have that ownership when we are driving that communication. I think that is the front and center of healthcare communications.
Thank you so much. I think what was really interesting for me is the rise of the care ecosystem. That would be great to see that happen in a country like India. So really, that really struck a chord. So over to Karishma, and then I'll come to Catherine. The question remains the same, but trying to get different points of view. Karishma, from the very specific point of view that you bring from FIND, what is your view on, especially on the urban-rural divide or divides in general, given that you cater specifically to providing low-income diagnostic tools?
Sure. So just starting with a quick introduction about FIND. So FIND is the Global Alliance for Diagnostics. We are an international non-profit organization headquartered in Switzerland, but we also have a presence in Kenya, South Africa, New Delhi, and Vietnam. So we have a presence in low and middle income countries where we work. And our aim is really to ensure equitable access to reliable diagnosis around the world. I think people here on the panel have already covered what does digital healthcare mean, what does it encompass, and your question, Parul, about the digital divide. I think a very important point to raise right now is that we cannot forget that even though digital technologies have brought about so many benefits and have, even in the field of diagnosis, it's really transformed how we diagnose patients. But I think we can't forget that 40% of the world today still lacks access to the internet. So while these tools are critical, I think that we need to really reinforce the message that connectivity and access to the internet should be recognized as a public good and as a human right. So we need to make sure that everybody who can get a diagnosis also has access to these digital means for digital technologies to actually work. And I think another point to raise here is that, a lot of data is being collected. So we also need to ensure that this data is used for the right reasons, again, for public good, and that this data doesn't fall into the wrong hands. So that is my quick answer to your question.
Thank you. And I think data protection is definitely going to be a very big issue for digitization of health. And thank you, Catherine, for being so patient and waiting it through all these comments. But over to you, coming from your lens with what you've seen happen in UK, which arguably a lot of people would say would have been faster to adopt the digitization of healthcare. What do you think are the trends which are specific to UK, but also would start having a resonance elsewhere as well?
Yeah, well, what the rest of the panel has said really resonates. So I don't want to risk just repeating what other people have said. I guess there are two things that I'm spending a lot of time talking about with clients in the UK. One of them, and this is a real positive of the digital transformation of healthcare, is how it can contribute to developing a more sustainable healthcare system. And that sustainability is increasingly a government priority, so that we transform our National Health Service into a sustainable care system. But also it's increasingly important to brands as they rightly look at how they can become more sustainable and provide sustainable healthcare solutions. So I think the first trend is a really positive one. I think the second, and this touches on what's already been said, but with the digital transformation comes the growing divide of people who have the ability the skills, the confidence, and also the infrastructure to access health solutions through digital platforms. And in the UK, I was surprised at the number of people who don't have access or the skills to make sure that they're getting the healthcare system, that they're receiving the care they need through digital platforms. So I think there's a positive and a negative trend that will continue into 2022.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That also really resonates, how to make the system more sustainable. I mean, that's something which India certainly grapples with constantly. And about the divide, we all know what happened with the CoWIN app. Unless you spoke English and had access to a smartphone, you would not have been able to book your vaccine slot. You had to depend on other people. And all of us have had this experience where we've done it for our household members and household help as well. We've all been in that situation. So it was truly not accessible to anybody who didn't speak English, in fact. So to come to the second point that I think segues perfectly into this whole pros and cons of the whole situation. So coming back to Usha, and then I'll come to Karishma. Usha, what do you think are the pros and cons of digitization? Data, of course, has been mentioned. The divide has been mentioned. What do you think, from your points of view, what are the major pros and cons?
Thanks, Parul, and thank you all for your views. And again, like Kashin said, a lot of what I said may actually overlap with what some of the others have said, but that's only because that only goes to show that we're all looking at common, a lot of these patterns are starting to emerge, and we're starting to identify the problems, the pros and the cons in the same manner. I think from everything that everyone has described, and also from the entire sort of like gamut of digital healthcare, the huge number of things that come under digital healthcare that I was talking about previously, on the pro side, among the most heartening things is putting power back in the hands of patients. Perhaps patient empowerment is something I think we've been talking about, meeting unmet needs of patients, letting patients take charge of their own health wherever possible. If be it wearables and gadgets, be it digital therapeutics, people being able to track their own healthcare journey, early diagnosis, nutrition, all of these things. There is a certain sense of empowerment in being able to track your healthcare journey, catch things early, move from that illness to wellness thing. Personalized medicine also is something that the panel has discussed, and I think this is another hugely promising trend, and that is something that also is very heartening to note. I'm not saying we found absolute ultimate solutions to everything, but increasing attention from all the stakeholders in this ecosystem to that has been very heartening. So healthcare management, personalized medicines. The other thing is, again, it may end up sounding like a summary of what we've all said, but never before have so many stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem come together, to sort of enable this healthcare management life cycle. So, just look at the sheer number of people and the diverse set of stakeholders that have come together. So certainly that ecosystem feeling has come in, and this is quite unprecedented. Healthcare at fingertips is something, and that ease of access is something that obviously has been another very positive trend. Increase in quality, because the more all of these elements start to take shape and develop, increasing quality of healthcare that is delivered, better processes as well as better outcomes.